First thing you're going to want to do when receiving your sampling kit is making sure that you have everything you need to complete a successful sample. The first item is the DVD that you're currently watching, followed by your documentation kit, which includes your checklist, chain of custody, and custody seals, a roll of paper towels, 2 large trash bags, your filter setups, sample container A, sample container B, sample container C, that's 3 sample containers, your fill container, your gloves, and a roll of packing tape. One of the most important steps in the sample collection process is to ensure that all documentation is completed properly. Remove all documents from the documentation packet, including the index cards, 2 custody seals, a chain of custody form, the produced water sampling checklist, the FedEx US air bill, and the produced water sampling procedure. Once all documents are in front of you, remove the sample container from the bag and ensure proper labeling of the container. Proper labeling would include the date, the time, and your initials. Please note on these containers that a sticker indicates that there will be fluid in the container which must remain in the container. Do not pour the fluid out. When labeling the first container, remove the second sample container from the bag and again properly label. Be aware that all highlighted areas must be completed for documentation to be completed successfully. Again, the date, the time, and his initials. Remove the third sample container from the bag, and again, date, time, and initial this container as well. Please note again on this container that it does have a sticker, and this sticker indicates that there will be fluid in the bottle. We do not want that fluid to be removed as it preserves the sample. Once you're completed labeling the bottles, you're then going to fill out the chain of custody form by putting the date and the time, and then you're going to print and sign your name on the same line. This is very, very important that the forms are completed properly. Once you're done there, you're going to sign it again. You're going to date it, and you're going to put the time again. Make sure to complete all highlighted parts on all documentation items. After completing the chain of custody form, you're going to move to the custody seal, again placing the date, the time, and then signing it underneath. You will have 2 custody seals, and you'll have to do this process again. The date, the time, and signing it once more. Once you've completed the custody seal, refer to the produced water sampling checklist, which will ensure documentation that the sample was collected properly. As you can see here, earlier on, we made sure that we had all items in the sampling kit. And as we've just recently done, we've made sure that all documentation is completed properly. The next step is to grab the pump case and assemble your pump correctly. The first thing you're going to notice when you open your pump case up is a FedEx US air bill, which will be completed or filled out to ensure that the pump is returned to Tetra Tech after the sample is collected. The next item is the pump, followed by the battery and the power cable. We also have included extra filters should they be needed during the sampling process. To assemble the pump, take the power cable and plug it into the back of the pump until you hear a click. Then the other part goes into the battery. Turn the pump around, and in the sampling kit, grab your filter setup, remove it from the bag, and if you notice on the filter setup, there'll be a silicone tube in the middle. This middle part must go into the pump. You're going to release the clamp, push that silicone piece all the way into the back of the pump, and pull the clamp down on top of it. Make sure that your flow switch matches the direction indicated on your filter. After making sure that we have everything in the sampling kit and the documentation is properly filled out, we want to make sure that we prep the cooler properly as well. The first step in prepping the cooler is making sure that if you have a FedEx air bill, if you have one, that you actually place it on top of the cooler and make sure that it is properly sealed accordingly. This will make sure that the cooler goes to the laboratory and make sure it gets to where it's supposed to get. The next step in prepping the cooler is making sure that you provide not one, but a double bag process for ensuring that the samples stay cool and on ice. So what you're going to do is open up one of the trash bags, put it into the cooler, then you're going to open up the other trash bag and place it in the cooler as well. Again, double bagged. It's very important that we use two bags. Two bags will ensure that we have proper containment throughout the whole transportation process. Once you have both bags in the cooler, you're then going to fill the bags with ice. Now, we want to make sure that we have enough room for all containers that are being collected. So don't overfill the cooler. Make sure the cooler is about half full and make sure that the ice is loose enough for you to take all the containers and place them in the overall cooler. Once you have the ice in the bags, the cooler prepped, you're then going to refer again to the checklist, again providing an opportunity for you to document that the process has been successfully completed, and you're going to check off this process. If you notice at this point, we are about halfway through the sampling process. Now that you've assembled your pump, the next step is to don a pair of gloves. Please note that extra gloves have been provided so that if your gloves get torn or dirty during the sample collection process, you can replace them. These gloves will protect you and the sample from contamination. Please note, prior to any collection of produced water samples, the produced water line should be flushed for 5 minutes to clear any stagnant water or collected oil before sample collection. Once the fill container is filled to the line, it is important to note that you have 15 minutes from this point to complete the filtration step and fill the sample bottles. Please open both the fill container and sample container A. Make sure that the filter direction matches the flow switch on the pump. Place the tubing in the fill container and turn on the pump. During this process, it's very important to understand that there are preservatives in sample container A, B, and C. Do not pour those preservatives out. Also, it's important that during this process, you may and could have a clogged filter. If your filter gets clogged, remember the first thing you're going to want to do is turn the pump off. Once you turn the pump off, simply pull the filter out of the tubing and grab a new filter from the extra filters that have been provided. Make sure the filter matches the directional flow switch on the pump. Insert the filter into the tubing and turn on the pump. Once the pump has been replaced, Continue filling container A until the fill line is reached. Once the fill line is reached, turn off the pump. Once you've filled the container to the fill line, it's very important that you clean the threads and outside of the container. After cleaning the container, make sure that you put the lid on and seal it tightly. You will repeat these steps for sample B and sample C so that all containers are filled to the fill line. Once you have all containers filled, make sure that sample A is inserted in the bag labeled sample A. Put the sample in, seal the bag halfway, push all the air out, and seal the bag completely. This will help during the packing process. Repeat the step for sample B, placing sample B container in the bag labeled sample B. Seal the bag halfway, push all air out, and seal it completely. The last step is placing sample C container in the bag labeled sample C, again zipping the bag halfway through, pushing all air out, and zipping the bag completely. Please note again that prior to collection of produced water samples, the produced water line should be flushed for 5 minutes to clear any stagnant water and/or collected oil before sample collection. If you've been asked for duplicate samples, it is important that all equipment is replaced, including the filter setup and the fill container. The very first step you're going to want to do is don a new pair of gloves, and that all sample containers, dupe A, B, and C, are filled as sample A, B, and C containers were previously. Now that the samples have been collected, we must make sure that we package the samples properly so they do not leak during the shipping process. To do this, we want to make sure that all Ziploc bags have all excess air removed from them so that they can be easily packed. We also want to make sure that regardless of how many containers we put in the cooler, that all the lids are securely tightened. Notice here how the air is removed from the Ziploc bag, and then the lid is tightened to make sure that samples do not leak during the shipping process. As you pack your cooler, you're going to want to make sure that all samples are not touching each other. So all sample containers are about 1 inch apart with plenty of ice between them. This is a very important step to make sure that the samples do remain intact during the shipping process. The next step is to make sure that the cooler is completely filled with ice. So you're going to want to top the cooler off with ice to make sure the samples remain cool during the shipping process. After topping the cooler off with ice, you have 2 bags. Remember, 2 bags that must be tied independent of one another, which means the first thing you're going to do is in the inner bag, you're going to remove all air from the bag and you're going to tie it. Once this is tied, you will have some excess bag remaining, and you're going to want to tuck that excess back into the outer bag. So if you notice here, he's tucking it down. As he tucks it down, he's then going to grab the outer bag, and what he's going to do is he's going to remove the air again so that no excess bag is on the outside of the cooler. He's going to remove the air, and he's going to tie the bag again. Once this is tied, he's going to tuck the remaining excess of the bag into the cooler, and he's going to make sure he tapes this down. It's very important that this excess is taped down so that you don't have trash bags hanging outside of the sample cooler. At this step, it would be very helpful if you had something sharp so that you can actually cut the tape instead of struggling to pull a piece off. Again, he's going to tape the remaining excess of the trash bags down to ensure they do not pop outside of the cooler during the shipping process. The next step you're going to want to do is make sure your documentation is properly completed. He's going to remove his gloves and take a look at the sample custody form, making sure that all highlighted areas have been completed. Again, this is a double check. There should be no items needed to be completed at this stage. You will have done this earlier, but you are going to double check and make sure that you've completed all highlighted areas. Once this is done, you're going to go to your checklist, make sure that all items above it have been checked off. And once you have checked off all items, you're going to check the last box, which is the packaging of the samples. You're going to sign your name. You're going to print your name. And you're going to provide the date. This documentation is extremely important in the sample process and must be packaged properly with the sample before being shipped. After completing this step, please place both of these documents inside the documentation packet. And please also include the instruction index cards as well. You're going to want to seal the Ziploc bag. And at this point, we are going to take this documentation packet and place it on top of the cooler, on the inside. It's very important on the inside so it is not lost during the shipping process. To do this, what you're going to do is take the documentation packet. You're going to fold it in half. It's okay to fold the documentation packet in half. And you're going to tape it to the top of the inside of the cooler, as seen here. Again, this is very important. All documentation must accompany samples to the laboratory environment. Once you've completed this process, you're going to close the cooler, and now we're going to make sure that we do the last step, which is very important. We're going to want to make sure that we have two custody seals that are attached on two sides of the cooler. They got to be opposite sides. So on the corner of one side, and then on the opposite side of that, you're going to place another custody seal. These are very, very important. At this point, we're going to want to make sure that the packaging tape goes over the custody seal so it is not removed during the shipping process. To do this, you're going to take the shipping tape and you're going to go around the cooler over the custody seal 3 to 4 times, as shown here. This will not only make sure the cooler remains sealed during the shipping process, but will also secure the custody seal as well. Again, at this point, it would be very helpful if you had a pair of scissors to cut the shipping tape. Once you've completed the first custody seal, remember you must do this again with the second custody seal. Again, securing the cooler, making sure that it is not open during the shipping process, but also making sure that the custody seals remain intact during the overall shipping process. Once you've made sure that the custody seals have been properly secured to the cooler, you are now ready to hand the sample cooler to the individual who will transport it to shore. Once all samples have been packaged properly, the next step is to pack the pump into the pump case and return it to Tetra Tech. This will require a FedEx air bill, which has already been addressed and labeled to Tetra Tech. The first step in packing the pump case is to remove the used filters and discard of them in the trash. The next step is to remove the power cord from the battery and the pump. Place the battery in the pump case, followed by the pump, but make sure that the clasp is returned to its normal state. After inserting the pump into the pump case, put the power cord in along with any unused filters. Again, these filters must be unused. Do not put used filters back inside the pump case. Once those filters have been put into the pump case, you're going to want to latch the pump case And to make sure that it arrives where it needs to arrive, you're going to attach the FedEx air bill to the top of the pump case. Please note, it's very important to note this. That airway bill must be addressed and should be going to Tetra Tech. If this label does not indicate that, you may have the wrong FedEx air bill on the pump case. Once you've put the FedEx air bill on the pump case, it is very important that the latches of the case remain closed during the shipping process. To do this, we want to make sure that we have packing tape and that the packing tape goes around the latches so that these latches will not open during the shipping process. You're going to want to do this for both latches. Again, you're going to take the shipping tape and you're going to go around the pump case 3 to 4 times, making sure that the latch remains closed during the shipping process. Once you have completed this process, the pump case is now ready to be shipped.